The moon was full and merciless. It hung above the Silver Crest packlands like a wound that refused to close, swollen, red at its edges, bleeding amber across the snow-dusted clearing where the ceremony should have been held. Should have been. Past tense. Because ceremony implied celebration, and tonight there would be none. Shyla had dressed herself in the white ceremonial gown before dawn, fingers trembling not with nerves but with anticipation. Today, she was to ascend. Today, the bond between her and Alpha Raymond would be recognized before the entire pack, before the elders and the moon goddess herself. Today, she would become Luna. She had believed him. That was the part that would carve itself deepest into her bones, not the rejection itself, not the cruelty that followed, but the believing. 6 years of believing. 6 years of enduring his volatility, his coldness, the way he would sometimes look through her as if she were made of smoke. She had told herself it was the burden of leadership, that great men carried great shadows. She had been 22 years old and very, very foolish. His voice, when it came, was not cruel. That was almost worse. It was detached, clinical, as though announcing a change in pack hunting routes rather than tearing out the heart of the woman who had shared his bed, his secrets, his blood-sworn vows. Strip! She had been standing near the window, watching the first wolves gather in the courtyard below. She turned. Raymond stood in the doorway. His golden eyes were flat. His arms were crossed over his chest. "Lay on your back," he continued. "Spread your legs." She stared at him for a long moment. In the silence, she heard her own heartbeat. She heard the distant howling of pack wolves, joyous, unknowing. No, it was a small word, almost inaudible, but it stopped him more thoroughly than a blade might have. His eyes changed. The flat detachment cracked, not into warmth but into something uglier. His upper lip lifted. His claws extended slowly, each one a sliver of silver-edged darkness. He crossed the room in 3 steps, and his hand closed around her throat. Not crushing. Not yet. A demonstration. A warning. A reminder of what he was and what she was not. "You will obey, Omega," she gasped. Her fingers came up to claw at his wrist. Not because she feared the pain, though pain was certainly coming. When she clawed at him because she was looking into his eyes and seeing, for the first time with perfect clarity, that the man she had loved was not there. Had perhaps never been there. She had been in love with a fiction. And the fiction was ending. "I, Alpha Raymond of the Silver Crest Pack." His voice rang out, formal and final, carrying the particular resonance that all pack declarations carried, embedding themselves into the supernatural fabric that bound their kind. "Hereby divorce and reject you, Shyla Voss. Your rank is stripped, your claim is void. You are no longer of this pack." The bond snapped. There was no metaphor sufficient for what that felt like. It was not like a rope breaking or a door closing. It was like having a piece of your soul reach out for something that had always been there. The warm, steady thread of connection, of belonging, of being known, and finding nothing. A void where there had been warmth. A silence where there had been presence. Her wolf, the quiet, silver-furred creature she had carried inside her since the age of 13, threw back her head and howled. Not in anger, in mourning. Shyla's knees hit the floor, and the world, as she had known it, shattered into pieces too small to ever reassemble. She did not weep in front of him. That small mercy, she allowed herself. She gathered herself from the floor with hands that shook only slightly. She changed out of the white gown, that symbol of everything she would not be, and into the rough-spun clothes of a traveler. She took nothing that was his. She took the little that was hers. A wolf-carved bone pendant her mother had left her, 3 copper coins, a winter cloak that had seen better decades. Outside, she could hear the pack beginning to murmur. Word traveled fast among wolves. The ceremony was canceled. The Luna had been rejected. Shyla Voss was nothing now. She stepped out into the cold, and the whispers began before she reached the courtyard gate. Disgraced Luna. Unworthy Omega. Barren. Always was. She kept walking. She kept walking because she had a secret that none of them could take from her. Beneath her trembling palms, pressed against her lower abdomen as she passed through the pack gates and out into the unguarded wilds beyond, something stirred. Something alive. Something small and miraculous, and hers. She carried Raymond's child, and she carried it out of Silvercrest territory like a coal clutched to her chest. Dangerous, burning, the only warmth she had left. If you enjoy dark paranormal romance filled with dominant kings, hidden queens, and dangerous destiny, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Banished with a secret. The uncharted wilds. 3 days after rejection. The snow did not care about her pain, neither did the wind. As both were equal opportunity tormentors, stripping heat from exposed skin with the same impersonal efficiency they stripped bark from birch trees and carried away the last dead leaves of autumn. Shyla had been walking for 3 days. She slept in the hollows of old growth trees and ate the dried provisions she had been smart enough to steal from the Silvercrest storerooms on her way out. A small act of defiance that tasted better than anything she'd eaten in 6 years. Her wolf wanted to shift. Running on 4 legs would be faster, warmer, more efficient. But she resisted. She did not know yet what shifting might do to the life growing in her, this tiny heartbeat still too faint for even her enhanced wolf senses to clearly detect. She would not risk it. So she walked. She had no destination when she started. Only a direction. Away. Away from Silvercrest, away from Raymond and his flat golden eyes, and away from the pack that had watched her humiliation and said nothing because saying something was not worth the alpha's displeasure. But the wilderness, it turned out, had its own ideas about where she should go. On the 3rd day, she crossed a boundary she felt before she saw it. It was invisible. No wall, no marker, no obvious line in the snow. But every instinct she possessed screamed at once, a chorus of animal warning that raised every hair on her body and made her wolf go very, very still. This was not pack territory, not the territory of any pack she had encountered before. The trees here were different, older, black-barked and enormous, their canopies interlocking overhead like the ribcage of some vast sleeping creature. The snow between them was unmarked by animal tracks, as though even the wildlife knew to keep its distance. And the air tasted of old power. Something ancient, something that had never once considered whether to be afraid of anything. If she should have turned back, she would have turned back. If the cold and the hunger and the exhaustion hadn't chosen that precise moment to collect all their debts at once. She collapsed in the snow at the foot of a black stone gate that rose from the earth like a natural formation, obsidian columns carved by something that understood architecture as an expression of dominance. The gate was enormous, twice the height of the tallest man. Wrought iron between the stone columns, was shaped into wolves mid-howl, their mouths open and their eyes blank. Above the gate, in letters that had been carved so long ago, the stone had begun to grow over them. Miller territory. Trespassers are not warned twice. She read it, and then the cold took her under. She dreamed of fire while she lay in the snow. Not destructive fire, not the fire of burning packs and ruined cities, though she would come to understand that such fires existed in the history of this place. She dreamed of hearth fire, steady and contained and warm, burning in a grate large enough to fit 3 standing wolves. She dreamed of a dark room and darker furniture and the smell of pine resin and old stone. She dreamed, for reasons she could not explain, of safety. And then she woke up. She was in a bed. A real bed, Not a traveler's hollow, not a pile of pine needles. A bed with linens that smelled of cedar and clean water, in a room lit by actual firelight. She sat up too fast, and the world tilted sideways. Her hand went to her abdomen. Still there, still whole. She released a breath she had been holding since the moment she collapsed. Then she noticed the guards. There were 4 of them. They stood at the 4 corners of the room with the perfect stillness of soldiers who had been still so long they had forgotten how to move. They were enormous, all of them standing a head taller than the largest man she'd known in Silvercrest. Their armor was black iron, and their eyes, when they registered she was awake, were that particular shade of gold that denoted wolf blood. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And then the temperature in the room changed. There was no other way to describe it. It didn't get colder exactly. It became something more deliberate than cold. The air itself seemed to stand at attention, as though every molecule recognized what was coming down the corridor beyond the closed door. The door opened. He entered.
The Devil King, the Lycan Palace. The Black Hall Maddox Miller did not simply walk into a room. He displaced it. He was tall in the way that ancient trees were tall, not just a measurement of height, but a statement of age, of deep-rootedness, of having outlasted things that lesser beings could not survive. Broad shoulders, a frame built not for aesthetics but for war. Dark hair pushed back from a face that was all hard geometry, sharp jaw, straight nose.
The kind of cheekbones that suggested his bloodline had been mixed with something other than wolf at some distant point in history. His eyes were the thing. Gold, yes, the gold of wolf heritage, but ringed with crimson, a deep blood red that pulsed faintly when the firelight caught them, like embers refusing to die. Lycan eyes, the eyes of something older and more predatory than the average pack alpha. He wore no crown. He needed none. Every particle of air in that room understood who it belonged to. He stopped in the center of the room. His gaze moved over her with the efficiency of a commander assessing terrain. Not unkind exactly, but utterly without the social niceties she had been raised to expect from men looking at women. He was cataloging, not admiring. The distinction was stark. Then he inhaled. It was a small motion, almost imperceptible, a slight flare of the nostrils, the way wolves did when scenting, automatic, unconscious, a reflex so embedded in the species it happened before thought could intercept it. The entire room froze. Every guard, every servant who had materialized in the doorway behind him. The very fire in the grate seemed to pause, its crackling silenced. Something moved across Maddox Miller's face, something she could not name, had no frame of reference for because she had never seen it on the face of anyone who looked like him. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the granite blankness of a man who had not permitted himself an unguarded expression in a very long time. But she had seen it. Whatever it was. Who is she? His voice was exactly what his presence promised. Deep, unhurried, carrying the particular resonance of authority so long established it had become geological. "A rogue, Your Majesty," one of the guards said. "Found at the outer gates. No pack scent. She crossed the boundary alone. Alone." It was not a question. It was the sound of a man turning new information over in his mind, examining it from all sides, looking for the deception in it. His gaze returned to her. Shyla had been looked at with pity, with contempt, with desire, with the particular cold assessment of a man deciding what to do with something he considered property. She had endured all of it. She had learned to make herself small under such gazes. She did not make herself small now. She met his eyes, those impossible crimson-rimmed gold eyes, and held them. Her chin came up. Her wolf, who had been whimpering and exhausted at the back of her mind, stilled. Not in submission, in recognition. Something shifted in his jaw, a muscle ticking once, twice, then going still. "What is your name?" Shyla, she said. Her voice was hoarse from cold and disuse. Shyla Voss, formerly of Silvercrest Pack. Formerly? Yes. What happened to Silvercrest? Nothing, she said. What happened was to me. A silence stretched between them, long and strange. His eyes did not leave hers. Feed her, he said finally, to no one in particular. Have the healer examine her. She is to be housed in the East Wing until I determine what to do with her. He turned to leave. You didn't ask why I'm here, she said to his back. He paused. No, he agreed. And I did not. Aren't you curious? He looked back at her over his shoulder. In the firelight, the crimson ring around his irises seemed to pulse. Extraordinarily, he said, and left. In the corridor outside, Maddox walked with the measured pace of a man keeping himself in careful, deliberate check. His wolf was not calm. His wolf was doing something it had not done in 300 years of carefully maintained solitude. It was pacing. Back and forth, wearing a groove in the metaphysical floor of his mind with the single-minded intensity of a creature that had just encountered something it recognized on a level beneath thought, beneath reason, beneath the centuries of iron control he had built over everything he was. Mine. The word had arrived with the force of a physical blow when he'd inhaled her scent. Winter pine and wolf musk and something sweeter beneath, something layered, doubled, which meant... He stopped walking. His jaw hardened to the consistency of the stone walls around him. She was pregnant, his fated mate, his destined, fates-decreed, once-in-eternity mate, was a rejected Omega carrying another Alpha's child. For a long moment, he stood in the black corridor and did something he rarely permitted himself. He felt the pull, that warm, magnetic, relentless pull toward the East Wing that his wolf would have him follow right now, this instant. Back into that room and beside her and never leave. And he felt, coiled beneath it, something he had not experienced since the night his own pack had been slaughtered when he was 19 years old. Fear. Not of her. She was no threat to his body, his territory, his power. An exhausted, rejected Omega with no pack, no allies, and a secret in her belly was no tactical threat whatsoever. The fear was of what she could make him become, of what he already felt himself beginning to bend toward. Is like a stone figure leaning toward heat it had no capacity to resist. Your Majesty, his steward said, materializing from the shadows. The northern delegation arrives at dawn. I know, Maddox said. He started walking again, away from the East Wing, away from the pull. He would master this. He had mastered everything else. He told himself this with great conviction. He did not believe it even slightly. The mark of fate. The Lycan Palace. Days later, Shyla expected death, or at least captivity. What she received instead was a kind of bewildering gentleness. She was given chambers in the East Wing that were larger than the entire upper floor of the Silvercrest Alpha House. The walls were black stone, hung with tapestries that depicted ancient battles in gold and crimson thread, the kind of history that had been violent and was now merely decorative. There was a hearth larger than any she had ever seen, and kept perpetually lit by servants who came and went with the silent efficiency of people long accustomed to making themselves invisible. She was fed, properly fed, not the half portions she had grown used to in Silvercrest, where the Alpha always ate first and the Omega always ate last. Here, trays appeared at regular intervals bearing more food than she could consume, and the healer who examined her, a tall, gray-maned elder wolf with hands like bark and eyes like still water, pronounced both her and the child unharmed by her ordeal, pressed an herbal tonic into her hands, and told her to rest. Who ordered all this? She asked the healer. The elder wolf studied her for a long moment with those still water eyes. Who do you think? He said. She did not see Maddox for 11 days. She felt him, though. That was the maddening part. The thread. She had no other word for it. The invisible thread she had first sensed when he entered that room. The warm and persistent and utterly incomprehensible pull in his direction. Remained. Constant as a heartbeat. Present even in sleep. Her wolf had stopped mourning. That was the first change she noticed. The howling grief that had been her wolf's constant companion since the bond snap began, incrementally, to quiet. It not because the wound healed, that kind of wound did not heal quickly, but because something new was demanding her wolf's attention. Something her wolf apparently found far more interesting than grief. The pull. She began to understand what it meant on the 8th day, when the healer returned for her second examination. "I am fated to him," she said. Not a question. The elder wolf did not look surprised. "Yes, he knows. He has known since you arrived." She looked down at her hands. They were steadier now than they had been since she left Silvercrest. Better food, proper rest, the particular physical ease of a body that wasn't being hunted. But her mind was another matter. "He hasn't come near me," she said. "No," the healer agreed. "Is he—" She stopped, started again. "Does he want nothing to do with me?" The elder wolf was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have served Maddox Miller for 140 years. In all that time, I have never seen him afraid of anything." A pause. "He has been afraid since the night you arrived." He came on the 11th night. She was awake. She had been finding sleep more elusive as the weeks passed, the child making her body strange and restless. She was sitting by the hearth with her knees drawn up, watching the fire, when the door opened. He filled the doorway. She had half convinced herself in the days of his absence that she had exaggerated him in her memory. That nobody's presence could actually bend the air. That the crimson ring around his irises was a trick of light, a thing she had imagined in her exhausted and traumatized state. She had not exaggerated him. If anything, up close and in the intimate quiet of a room lit only by firelight, he was more. He stood in the doorway for a moment that stretched long enough to have geological significance. Then he moved. Crossed the room with that slow, deliberate stride. He stopped on the other side of the hearth and looked at her. "You are my fated mate." No greeting, no preamble. He said it the way he seemed to say everything, as a fact delivered, not a confession offered. "I know," she said. Something moved in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she would admit it without flinching. "I am with child," she said, meeting his eyes, holding them. "Another man's. My former Alpha's. Before whatever this is, you need to know that. All of it." The silence that followed was vast and many-chambered. The temperature in the room dropped by several perceptible degrees. The fire guttered. Cracks appeared along the mortar of the nearest wall, just hairline fractures, barely visible, but unmistakable evidence of what was happening inside him. His hands, at his sides, had gone still, but his claws had extended, half an inch, enough to catch the firelight. She did not look away. For a long moment he stood there, a king containing himself the way a dam contains a river, all that force held back by the sheer architecture of his will. Then he turned away. He stood with his back to her, one hand pressed flat against the wall beside the hearth. She could see the tension in his shoulders, in the line of his neck, in the rigid set of his spine. "My wolf does not care," he said. His voice was rough, controlled but rough, the voice of someone forcing words through something that did not want to be forced. "It does not distinguish between your child and mine. It only wants—" He stopped. "That terrifies me," he said. She stared at his back. Somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the grief and the exhaustion and the particular heaviness of a woman carrying the end of everything she had known. Somewhere beneath all of that, something small and stubborn stirred. Not hope. Not yet. But the precondition of hope. Something that said, this one is different. The War Within. The Lycan Palace. The following weeks. Maddox Miller had burned cities. This was not a metaphor or a hyperbole. It was documented fact, written into the histories of 7 packs who had made the mistake of threatening his territory in the 3 centuries since he came into his power. He had slaughtered kings in single combat and returned their skulls to their own packlands as messages. He had waged campaigns of such methodical ferocity that the mere invocation of his name was sufficient to end border disputes between packs that shared nothing else in common. He had done all of this calmly, strategically, without the burning, volatile anger that drove weaker alphas to overextend themselves. He was not a man who lost control. He had never, in 300 years, been so thoroughly undone by something as the sound of a woman's steady voice saying, "I know." He began, in the weeks that followed, to find reasons to be in places she was likely to be. This was not intentional. He told himself each time that it was coincidence or duty or the entirely reasonable desire to ensure that a potential threat to his territory was being properly monitored. He told himself this with complete insincerity. He found her in the palace kitchens on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting at the work table with the head cook, listening with genuine interest to a lecture on the proper way to salt winter game. She had clearly charmed the cook entirely. The old woman, who tolerated exactly 3 living beings, and one of them was a cat, was laughing. Actually laughing. Maddox stopped in the doorway and watched this, and felt something complicated happen in his chest. He found her in the East Wing courtyard on a cold, clear morning, crouched beside one of the palace's younger wolf guards. A boy of perhaps 16 who had apparently sustained an injury during training. She was inspecting his wrist with steady, competent hands, explaining the difference between a sprain and a strain with the patient specificity of someone who had been the de facto healer of a pack that did not bother to provide proper healers for its omegas. He found her in the library on a night when the wind was making the palace groan and rattle. She was seated cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by books too large and old for the reading tables, absorbed in something written in a script so ancient only 3 people alive could still read it. When she heard his footfall, she looked up without alarm. "Is this your history?" she asked, holding up the book. He looked at it. The record of the Lycan Kings, over 1,000 years inscribed in blood ink on pressed darkwood pages. "Part of it," he said. "The first 100 years are almost entirely battles," she said. "Oh, did nothing else happen?" He almost smiled. Almost. "Things happened," he said. "They were not considered worth recording." "Who decided what was worth recording?" "The winners." She looked at the book for a moment, then thoughtfully, "That explains a lot." He stood in the doorway and watched her return to reading and understood, with the crystalline clarity that came to him very rarely and usually at enormous personal inconvenience, that he was already lost. The question was no longer whether. The question was what to do about it. It was she who first asked him a direct question about himself. They had established a kind of accidental routine by then. Evening walks along the upper battlements, ostensibly because both of them found the cold air useful for thinking, actually because neither of them had found a way to stop the routine once it began. The palace lay below them, a complex of black stone spires and lit windows, and beyond its walls the forest stretched to the horizon, dark and enormous and ancient, the same forest that had swallowed her when she fled Silver Crest and delivered her, by some mechanism she still didn't fully understand, to this gate. "Do you enjoy ruling through fear?" she asked. The question hung in the cold air between them. He looked at her. Her face was turned toward the forest, her breath misting in the cold, the beginning curve of her pregnancy just visible beneath her cloak. She was not asking to provoke him. She was genuinely curious. That was the thing about her. She asked questions with the simple intent of getting answers, without the social armor and hidden agendas that he had learned to expect from everyone who spoke to him. He thought about it honestly, the way he had not thought about such a question in a very long time. "No," he said at last. She turned to look at him. "Then why?" "Because fear keeps enemies alive long enough to kneel," he said. "Power understood is power that doesn't have to be exercised. Every pack that fears my name is a pack that hasn't sent soldiers to die at my gates. Every alpha who backs down from my territory is an alpha whose people are still breathing." He paused. "I do not enjoy it. I find it tedious. But I am 300 years old, and I have learned that what we enjoy is a poor guide to what works." She was quiet for a moment. "Raymond enjoyed it," she said. The name landed between them with the weight of an accusation, though he knew she didn't mean it that way. "I know the name," he said carefully. "He enjoyed it," she repeated. "The fear, the submission. He fed on it. He would manufacture reasons to assert dominance because the dominance itself was the point." She looked back at the forest. "There's a difference," she said, "between using fear as a tool and mistaking fear for respect." Silence. The wind moved between them. "Yes," he said quietly. "There is." Something shifted between them in that moment. Something small and structural, like a keystone settling into place. The return of Raymond the Lycan Palace. 2 months later, winter solstice. Eve Peace, in Maddox's experience, was always precisely as long as it needed to be to make you want it too much. He was in the war room when the scout's report arrived. He read it once, read it again. He set it down on the black stone table with the particular careful deliberateness of a man ensuring his hands did not do what they wanted to do, which was to close the document into splinters. Then he stood, straightened his coat, and went to find Shyla before she heard it from someone else. She was in the East Wing garden, which was not much of a garden in the technical sense, mostly dead plants and dormant stone planters, the kind of thing that was maintained for aesthetic reasons rather than agricultural ones. She had somehow, in the past weeks, convinced the groundskeeper to let her do things to it. He was not certain what those things were, exactly, but there were now signs of life in the dead planters that had not been there before. She was crouched beside one of them, examining something green with the focused attention she brought to everything, when he came through the gate. She looked up when she heard his step. She always heard him now, even when he tried to be quiet, as though her wolf tracked him on some frequency he could not block. She read his face. "Tell me," she said. "Raymond has crossed the northern border with 300 soldiers," he said. "Silver crest banners. He reached the outer forest boundary 2 hours ago." She did not move, did not flinch, but the plant she was holding slipped from her fingers and she made no move to catch it. He wants..." She stopped. "He knows. He found out about the child." His advance runner made a formal declaration. Maddox kept his voice level, factual. "He claims paternity of the child you carry. He demands your return. He frames it as a matter of bloodline right under interpack law." Silence, then quietly. "He rejected me. He dissolved our bond. Under the same interpack law he's invoking, he has no..." "No," Maddox agreed. "He has no legal standing." "He knows this. Then this isn't about law. No, it is a test." He crouched down beside her, bringing himself to her level, and this was something she had noticed he did. This man who could look down on everyone chose, with her, not to. "He is testing whether I will concede, negotiate, or respond. And he will receive his response at the outer gate," Maddox said, "at dawn." They met beneath a sky the color of old blood. In the clearing before the outer gate, where the silver crest banners snapped in a wind that smelled of coming snow. Raymond had not changed. Shyla stood at the battlements above, watching from a distance that he had insisted on, and she had refused, and they had eventually compromised on by her watching from the upper gate rather than the ground. He was still the same, broad-shouldered and golden-haired, was the particular physical perfection of an alpha who had been born to lead and had never once questioned whether he deserved to. She had once found that certainty compelling. Now it looked like what it was, the confidence of a man who had never been made to account for anything. He had brought 300 soldiers, and he arranged them behind him with the theatricality of a man who understood staging. 2 neat lines, banners flying, a visual declaration, I am significant, I am backed, I am not someone you dismiss. Maddox came to the gate alone. That was the first thing Raymond clearly had not expected. No guard of honor, no army, no demonstration of force. Just the king himself, standing at his own gate in a dark coat, hands clasped behind his back, looking at Raymond the way a geologist might look at a rock of mild interest. Alpha Raymond of Silvercrest, Maddox said. His voice carried across the clearing without effort, without raising. The cold morning air delivered it to every soldier's ear. You have crossed into Miller territory without invitation or permission. I would hear your reason. Raymond pointed toward the battlements, toward her. She carries my air, he said. His voice was the carrying boom of an alpha accustomed to being heard. My blood, my lineage. No matter what whim of fate has led her to your door, that child belongs to Silvercrest. Return her. Maddox did not look toward the battlements. He kept his eyes on Raymond, steady and unhurried. She is mine, he said. 2 words. No embellishment, no legal argument, no appeal to interpack law or territorial precedent. Just a declarative statement of the same order as the sun is up or the stone is hard. Raymond laughed. It was not a pleasant laugh. You would raise another man's child, he said. You, the Lycan King, the untouchable, He made a gesture of contempt that his soldiers mirrored with the sheep-like reflexivity of men who had been told what to think. She has corrupted you already. A king, Maddox said quietly, raises what fate gives him. A silence. Then Raymond shifted. He had not come here to talk. Shyla understood this in the moment his form began to blur, the clothes shredding, the enormous pale wolf erupting from him with a howl that shook snow from the black trees. I.e., he had come here to make a demand and enforce it with his body. That was, in the end, the only language he had ever truly spoken. Maddox watched him come, and then Maddox stepped forward to meet him. The shift, when it came, was not like any shift Shyla had ever witnessed. In Silvercrest, shifting was messy and loud, bones cracking, the human form writhing and expanding into the wolf. It took seconds. It looked like pain. Maddox's shift took perhaps half a second. There was a sound, not cracking but a deep resonance, something felt in the chest more than heard. And then the man was gone, and in his place stood something that used the word wolf the way a typhoon used the word wind. The lichen form was enormous, midnight black, fur-like shadow made solid, eyes burning the same crimson-rimmed gold as his human gaze. It was not merely larger than Raymond's wolf, it operated in a different categorical register. Something older, something that had not needed to evolve aggression because it had been born with the complete and definitive version. The battle lasted less than 3 minutes. It would have lasted less than 1 if Maddox had been trying. When it ended, Raymond lay on the snow-covered ground with the Lycan King's enormous paw resting across his chest, applying just enough weight to communicate everything that needed communicating without breaking anything. Raymond's wolf, proud, dominant, as certain, had simply ceased to struggle. Not from submission, exactly, from the recognition, bone-deep and humbling, that it was in the presence of something it could not overcome if it spent a decade trying. Maddox shifted back. The process was as sudden as it had been before. He stood over Raymond in his human form, hands behind his back, and looked down at him. "Leave," he said. "Take your soldiers. Return to Silver Crest. If you approach my border again under arms, but I will consider it a declaration of war, and I will respond as I respond to declarations of war." Raymond, slowly, carefully, without looking anyone in the eye, stood and walked back to his soldiers. He did not look up at the battlements. He did not look at Shyla. He simply walked away. She watched him until the Silver Crest banners disappeared into the distant tree line, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Nothing. Not relief, not grief. Not the bittersweet ache of seeing the ruin of something she had once loved. Nothing at all. The chapter was closed, and the book had moved on, and the only direction that meant anything was the one she was already facing. The choice. The Lycan Palace, that evening. Snow had begun to fall by the time Maddox found her in the upper courtyard. She was standing at the carved stone railing, watching the last light drain from the sky. The first stars emerging in the east with the tentative quality of things that hadn't yet decided whether tonight was safe. Snow fell around her, settling in her dark hair, and she made no move to go inside. He stopped a few feet behind her, close enough that she would hear him, far enough that she could choose whether to acknowledge him. She chose. "You could have killed him," she said. Her voice was steady. She didn't turn. "Yes. I've seen you at strategy," she said. "I know how you think. A defeated enemy left alive is a variable you haven't resolved. Generally. Why didn't you?" A pause. The snow fell between them. "Come inside," he said. "You're cold." "Answer the question." Another pause. Longer this time. He moved, crossed the space between them, and stood beside her at the railing, both of them looking out at the darkening forest, the fading light, the first stars. His hand came up, slowly, with the particular careful deliberateness of a man who had been alone for a very long time and was no longer certain of the etiquette of closeness, and rested against her abdomen. Not possessive, not claiming, just present. "This child," he said very quietly, "will know mercy from me. From the first moment of their life, they will know that the strongest person in their world chose not to kill when killing was easiest. I want that to be the first lesson." She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. In the snow and the starlight, with the cold stripping everything to essentials, she saw him clearly. This ancient, violent, careful, lonely man who had built walls out of fear and ruled through them for 3 centuries, and was now, incrementally and with tremendous reluctance, being undone by her. Maddox, his name in her mouth. She saw what it did to him, the almost imperceptible flinch, the slight catch in his breath, the way his eyes closed briefly as though he needed a moment. "You accept us," she said. "Both of us. The child that isn't yours." He looked at her. The crimson-rimmed gold of his eyes was steady. "The child is mine," he said, "if I choose it. Fate gave you to me. What I do with fate's gifts is my own decision." A pause. "I choose you. Not because the bond compels me. The bond can be resisted. I've resisted it for weeks. Not because your wolf called to mine, though it did. From the first moment. I choose you because you are strong in ways I am broken. Because you ask questions I had stopped asking myself. Because you sat in my library reading 1,000-year-old history, and your first thought was about who got to decide what was worth recording." He paused. "Because," he said more quietly, "I have been alone for a very long time. Albeit, and you are the first person I have met in 3 centuries who made me feel that solitude as a deprivation rather than a preference." The snow fell around them. She reached up. Her hand closed over his where it rested against her abdomen. "Then we should probably stop pretending this is going to go any other way," she said. And for the first time in her memory, For the first time in what she suspected was a very long time for both of them, she smiled without a reason to be guarded about it. He marked her under the open sky in the falling snow by the light of stars that had been watching this moment gather for longer than either of them knew. Not in the way Raymond had marked her, the claiming of territory, the assertion of ownership, the sharp pain of a dominant wolf impressing its will on a lesser one. This was different. This was a mark made with trembling hands, his hands trembling, which she suspected had not trembled for 300 years, placed at the curve of her neck, with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood what he was doing and wanted to be certain she understood it too. "Last chance," he said against her skin. "I've been waiting 11 days for you to get here," she said. "Don't make me wait any longer." He laughed. She felt it before she heard it. The deep, surprised, almost rusty sound of a laugh that hadn't been used much and was discovering it still worked. Then his teeth found the mark, gentle at first and then firm, and the bond that had been humming between them since the night she arrived, pulling, straining, patient as a tide, finally, completely, settled into place. And the world, which had shattered once before, became something new. The birth of a new era. The Lycan Palace, 3 months later. Spring. Spring came to the Black Cliffs the way it came nowhere else. Suddenly, in a single week, as though the forest had been waiting for permission. The black-barked trees burst into silver-green leaf almost overnight. The dead planting beds in the East Wing courtyard, which Shyla had spent 2 months quietly tending, erupted into life in colors she hadn't dared to predict. The wolves of the palace, guard and servant and ancient advisor alike, moved through the corridors with something subtly different in their bearing. Something lighter. The pack, Shyla had come to understand, was a living thing. Its mood was communal, its emotional weather shaped by whatever its dominant pair were feeling. For 300 years, that weather had been predominantly gray, functional, orderly, safe in the way that fortresses were safe, secure, but also contained. But something was changing. She could not claim sole credit. She would not want to. Maddox himself was different, still formidable, still the kind of man a room rearranged itself around, still capable of the cold, strategic precision that had kept his territory intact for 3 centuries. But there was something in him now that had not been there before, a quality she could only describe as present. He was here, in his own life, in a way he had not been. She thought about this on the morning her labor began. It was not an easy labor. She had not expected it to be. Nothing in the past months had suggested that the universe had chosen her for easy things. It lasted 17 hours, attended by the elder healer and 2 palace midwives and Maddox, who had planted himself in the corner of the room at the first contraction, and whom no force on earth was subsequently able to move. "You don't have to stay," she told him, at about the 8-hour mark. "I know," he said. "It's—" She paused for a contraction. "Not going to be pleasant." "I've been in battles," he said. "I have seen unpleasant. This is different." "Yes," he agreed. He was holding her hand. She could feel the tension in him, the helplessness of a man accustomed to solving problems by sheer force, confronting a situation in which sheer force was entirely beside the point. "It is different. I am staying." She did not argue further. The child arrived in the blue hour before dawn, when the sky was the color of deep water and the palace was as quiet as it ever got. He was announced by a sound that brought every wolf in the East Wing upright and alert. Not a cry, exactly, more of a declaration. The particular vocal confidence of a creature who had arrived with opinions and intended to express them. He had dark hair. His father's hair, the hair of the man who had rejected him before he was born. And this fact tugged at something complicated in Shyla's chest before the baby was fully in her arms. Then she saw his eyes. Gold, golden as morning, as honey, as the particular warm amber of firelight on old stone. but at the edges, just at the very edges, in the corona around the iris, a ring of deep, deliberate crimson. She looked up at Maddox. He was staring at the child with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something beyond surprise. Something beyond the warmth she had watched cautiously accumulate in him over the past months. Something raw and immediate and complete. "He has your eyes," she said. "No," Maddox said quietly. He reached out, one large hand encompassing the child's head with the kind of tender accuracy that a man of his physical power had to consciously calibrate. "He has his own eyes. They simply happen to resemble mine." "That's the same thing." "It absolutely is not." She laughed, exhausted, tear-streaked, triumphant. The baby blinked at his mother with the ancient, baffled attention of all newborns, as though the world was a question he was already working on answering. They named him Calyx. It meant chalice, a vessel, something meant to hold what mattered most. The Pax whispered again, this time differently. News traveled, as it always did among wolves, on channels that predated human communication, scent marks and runners, and dreams shared between pack members in the particular way that high-bond wolves sometimes dreamed. By the time the moon had cycled twice since Calyx's birth, every pack within 100 miles knew that the Lycan King's fated mate had delivered a child bearing Lycan blood markers. This was, by any historical reckoning, unprecedented. Children born of fated pairings were rare. Children bearing the mixed markers of Lycan royal blood and alpha pack lineage had not existed in the recorded history of any pack, anywhere. The elder healer, who had seen nearly everything in 140 years of service, said he had never seen a child like Calyx. The ancient seer, who lived in a tower room that no one visited voluntarily and smelled of burned herbs and old paper, sent a message that Maddox read 3 times and showed to no one, there and whose contents made his expression do something complicated for several hours afterward. "What did she say?" Shyla asked. "She says he is significant," Maddox said. "Most parents think their children are significant." "Most parents," he said carefully, "are not receiving corroborating opinions from seers." She looked at him. "You're not telling me everything." A pause. "No," he said, "I am not." "Maddox, give me time," he said, not evasively, but with the particular gravity of a man who knew that what he carried was significant and was uncertain how to pass it on without it being heavier than the receiver could manage. "I am still deciding how to say it." She gave him time. She was, by now, learning his rhythms, the vast, patient pauses, the careful assembly of words, the way he spoke most truly when he spoke least. She waited. The prophecy awakens. 5 years later, a night the stars remembered. The Lycan Palace had not known 5 years of peace in living memory. It had known 5 years of something rarer and stranger than peace. Normalcy. The particular warm, complicated daily normalcy of a home in which people who loved each other were figuring out how to share space and time and the slow accumulation of ordinary days. Morning councils followed by long walks in the forest. Evenings in the library. All 2 sets of feet on the same reading chair, the fire burning low. Calyx growing. Fast like all wolf children, but with a quality that set him apart from the palace's other young that Shyla couldn't name. Not quite. Only that he seemed to be always paying attention to something just beyond what everyone else was watching. He was, by any measure, a strange child. Not unpleasant, never that. He laughed easily and asked questions constantly and had inherited with terrifying precision, but the particular quality that had drawn Maddox to Shyla in the first place, the ability to look at a thing and see it whole, without the filters that most people installed in childhood to make reality more manageable. He had made friends with the ancient seer. This, of all things, unsettled Maddox more than any of it. "She smells like the really old books," Calyx had explained when questioned. "The ones in the locked cabinet." And she asks good questions. What does she ask you? Calix had considered this with the earnest gravity of a 5-year-old who took questions seriously. She asks me what I dream about, he said. She says my dreams are unusual. What do you dream about? A pause. The moon, Calix said. I dream about the moon, about talking to it. It talks back. He had said this with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting that it rained today or that dinner was good, and then moved on to asking for a second serving of honey cake, and Shyla had sat with Maddox afterward in the evening dark, and neither of them had found quite the right words. You knew, she said. The seer told me at his birth, Maddox said. I am still... He stopped, started again. I have been many things. I have been a soldier and a king and a force of fear and recently something I am still learning the name for. But I have never been the father of a child the moon goddess talks to in dreams? I was going to say a miracle, he said quietly, but your phrasing is also accurate. The night it happened was the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, the night when the membrane between the natural and the ancient grew thin and strange things could come through it. Calix had gone to bed early, unusually tired after a day in the forest with his father. The palace had settled into its nighttime rhythms, guards rotating, fires banking, the deep quiet of a household that had learned over 5 years how to rest. Maddox and Shyla were in the upper study, across from each other at the long stone table, when the palace shook. Not like an earthquake, not like an explosion, like a tuning fork struck against the fundamental frequency of the world itself, a deep, single vibration that passed through stone and bone and was felt in the teeth, in the marrow, in the very root of the wolf sense. They were moving before the vibration finished, down 2 flights of stairs, through the east wing corridor, through the double doors of the children's chamber. The courtyard. Calix stood in the center of it. He had shifted. Not to the small, clumsy pup form that most wolf children achieved on their first shift, not the tentative half-transformation that typically marked early manifestation. He had shifted fully and completely. And what stood in the center of the palace courtyard was a wolf the size of a young stallion, every single hair burning with silver fire so bright it cast shadows on the black stone walls. His paws had not moved. He stood perfectly still, perfectly balanced, the enormous silver wolf form wrapped in living light and his eyes. White, not gold, not crimson, not the amber of Lycan heritage or the pale gold of alpha blood. White, pure, and absolute. Makes the color of moonlight before it has touched anything, the color of a thing that has not yet become what it will be but is already certain of what that is. The light reached beyond the courtyard walls. It reached across the palace grounds, into the forest, over the mountain ridges at the edge of the territory. Miles away, in packs that had nothing to do with the Lycan King, wolves lifted their heads from sleep and looked at the northern sky. The ancient seer was the first to arrive in the courtyard after Maddox and Shyla. She came not running, she never ran, but moving with the particular purposeful unhaste of someone who had been expecting this. She took one look at Calix, and she fell to her knees. In 140 years, Maddox had never seen her do that. Not before any king, not before any power. She had the fundamental stubbornness of the very old, who have survived too much to be easily impressed. She fell to her knees now. What is happening? Shyla's voice was steady, but her hand had found Maddox's arm and her fingers had closed with enough force to feel through the muscle. The moon goddess has returned her champion, the seer said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, which made it somehow louder than anything else in the still courtyard. Shyla's throat moved. What does that mean? The seer looked up. Her eyes, pale with age, were wet. It means he is not merely heir to the Lycan throne. He is heir to something older than thrones. Older than... The moon herself chose a champion, before the first wolf ran, before the first pack formed, before men and wolves learned to share their blood. She chose one and poured into them the authority she could not herself exercise in the physical world, the ability to act, to intervene, to make real the balance she could only otherwise maintain through the slow, grinding work of fate. The seer's eyes went to Calyx, still burning in the center of the courtyard. The last champion died 4,000 years ago. The power has been waiting since, waiting for the right combination, the right bloodlines, the right circumstances, the right two people whose joining would produce a vessel capable of containing it. She looked at Maddox and Shyla. "It waited for you," she said. The light faded slowly, the way a true fire fades, not extinguished but banked, retreating to some internal source that remained warm even when invisible. Calyx stood in the courtyard in his small human form again. He was unharmed, unmarked, apparently unbothered. He looked at his parents with the same guileless attention he brought to everything. "The moon talked to me again," he said. "She said it was time." Maddox crouched down, brought himself level with his son's eyes. Those white eyes, burning with something too deep to be fire. "Time for what?" he asked. Calyx thought about it with the gravity of a child who understood that some questions required the right answer. "She didn't say exactly," he said. "She said I'd know when I knew. She said—" A pause. "She said the old things are waking up, that they've been asleep a long time and they're not happy about it, but they've been asleep because someone made them sleep, and whatever made them sleep is gone now." Silence. "She said we'd need to be ready." Maddox held his son's eyes for a long moment. Then he put both hands on the boy's shoulders and felt, through his palms, the contained hum of something that was not quite wolf, not quite human, not quite anything that had a name in any language he spoke. "We will be ready," he said. They would not be the only ones who saw the light. Across 3 mountain ranges and 2 river systems, in the packlands of Silver Crest where the snows had come early and the winter had already begun to feel like a warning, Raymond stood at his study window and watched the white glow in the northern sky. He had spent 5 years telling himself a story, a satisfying story, well-organized and internally consistent, in which he had made the right choices, and the humiliation at the Lycan Gate had been a tactical retreat rather than a defeat. And everything was proceeding according to a plan that would eventually, inevitably, restore the order of things. The white glow in the northern sky did not feature in that story. He watched it fade and smiled. Not the warm smile of a man who had good news. The cold, careful smile of a man who has been waiting for confirmation that the thing he feared most was real, because it is the things you fear most that, once confirmed, tell you where the real game is played. "This isn't over," he said to the dark window. He was, for once in his life, entirely right. In the courtyard of the Blackcliff Palace, Shyla Voss, formerly Omega, formerly rejected Luna, currently Queen, held her son against her chest and watched the last of the silver fire fade from the stones. She had spent 5 years cataloging the things she'd never expected to have. Safety, warmth, a partner who chose her with the full weight of a 300-year-old will rather than the temporary convenience of desire. A child who was, by any measure, extraordinary. She had not expected to be afraid. But she was not only afraid. She looked at Maddox over the top of their son's head. He was looking back at her, already. He was always already looking at her. It was a thing about him that she had stopped finding surprising and started finding foundational. In his eyes, she saw what she felt. The fear, yes. The weight of what was coming. The knowledge that the story was not finished and the next chapter would not be gentle. But also, the same thing that had been in his eyes on the night he knelt in the snow and chose her. Absolute certainty. She had survived rejection. She had crossed a wilderness in winter. She had walked into the territory of the most feared creature in the known world and fallen asleep on his doorstep. And when she woke up, she had found, improbably, exactly what the universe had always meant to give her. She was not afraid of what was coming. She was ready for it. And beside her stood the man who had once ruled through fear alone, who had learned at last that the only thing worth ruling through was love. End of Book 1. The ancient things are waking. A champion walks beneath a mortal moon, and somewhere in the dark between the stars. The first war of a new age is already drawing breath. Lycan King's Omega, Book 2, coming soon. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, the next chapter is waiting.